infrastructure is really falling behind. You know, the last 30 years of infrastructure in the US in particular has really been defined by government-corporate partnerships. Governments using resources and directing resources to the right companies to be able to best create infrastructure. The best example to me for this is AT&T. My favorite stat. In 30 years, AT&T has not created $1 of shareholder value. Not $1. The stock is down over 30 years. And they've spent hundreds of billions of dollars in the meantime. A lot of it was their money, but some of it was yours. Public funding. So we have this paradigm of a government that is taking a bigger and bigger and bigger role. They're doing more and more, but they're achieving less than ever before. It's a weird moment. The thing to me that really, really brings us all home is I listen to every AT&T earnings call. And every single one, there's this amazing paradigm where the CEO sits down and he talks about, okay, this year we spent X on growth. We spent Y on acquisitions, but we didn't grow. And then all of these analysts, all of these overpaid analysts sit around. They scratch their heads and say, why didn't we grow? Why is it happening again? I know the answer. I think you guys know the answer too. Bell Labs used to be the center of innovation for the world. The people at Bell Labs used to be the center of innovation for the world. Now it's y'all. There's no fire at AT&T anymore. The fire's in this conference room. So, in the midst of that, the why now is so important. Why DePIN now? Why DePIN today? And to me, it's more obvious than it's ever been before. 3 reasons. 1, institutions are hurting. 2, politics are becoming more and more intertwined with infrastructure. 3, demand is crazy. Starting with number 1 very quickly, incumbents are really hurting. Part of it goes back to that paradigm that I described earlier of government funding. But a big part of it is just mismanagement. You know, coming out of COVID, these companies borrowed irresponsibly, borrowed huge amounts of money to fund growth that just hasn't shown up. A couple of quick examples. Telecom tripled the size of their balance sheets, 2019 to 2022. Spent almost all of it on spectrum licenses. Now they're sitting around saying, how the hell am I going to actually build out 5G? They don't have a good answer. Energy businesses, more than ever, are being driven by rate card structures, where the government is telling you how much you can make. That number? It's between 10 and 15%. Are you going to get up and innovate for 10 and 15%? Not as much. Lastly, let's talk about AI and compute for a second, where there's an increased concentration among the biggest players. That's dangerous for everybody. If Mark Zuckerberg can kingmake, what does the world really look like in 10 years? I can't answer that, but I don't want to live through it. Institutions have accumulated debt in crazy quantities, but I'm not just talking about financial debt. There's financial debt, there's political debt, where they've taken favors without actually giving anything back. And there's social debt. Look at what they've done to the environment. So it's clear from an institutional perspective, it's time for a paradigm shift. From a government perspective, it's also worth talking about. Infrastructure has become a global currency for bartering. When China wants to create relations with a new country today, they build them a telecom system, or they build them an energy grid, or they build them an airport. It's hard to compete against that at the end of the day. Now that would be great, but what we're finding 5 years down the road is that none of that infrastructure was what it was promised to be. These countries traded monetary gain, i.e. infrastructure being built, for their privacy, for their security. There's a number of African countries today that will tell you that the Chinese government is listening to everything across their telecom systems. And they're right, there's a great book about it by Jonathan Pelson. So how do you compete with that? These countries can't go raise $10 billion from capital markets to go build their own infrastructure. The US sure doesn't have the capacity today with all the support we're giving everyone else to go do this too. China spent $1 trillion in the Belt and Road Initiative. for this purpose and this purpose alone. The only way to compete is peer-to-peer infrastructure. For people to take their own fate back. For them to, at the end of the day, realize that if they want sovereignty and they want privacy, they have to make it for themselves. The last thing to talk about, the most optimistic and the most interesting one though, is demand. At the end of the day, we're really on the precipice of something incredible. Demand for digital commodities, described and defined as bandwidth, compute, and storage, is as high as it's ever been. And it's only going up. It's grown at over 25% every year for the last 25 years. And now I look out at the horizon. We have an internet-driven financial system coming. We have AI-powered assistants going to be in every walk of your life, from education to business. And you have VR experiences that are going to start showing up everywhere at the end of the day. You're going to demand higher quality of entertainment. All of this is going to require a huge, huge, huge amount of compute power and bandwidth. The world isn't set up to support that today at the end of the day. You know, commodities have powered almost every big boom of the last 200 years. When you think about the 1860s, it was coal. Coal powered the locomotive revolution. Coal connected this country, and coal created the American economy as we know it. That was then. That was really an intra-US exercise, and an exercise by which people were empowered for the first time to try something like traveling. Then we had the auto revolution after it, with oil, another core commodity. And this was a more personal one. It's almost like an operating system for people to explore the world. Never before have people been able to go 5 miles from where they lived. Fast forward to the 80s to now, we have our third one, powered by silicon and cobalt. Computing revolution. It looks a lot like the original one with coal, actually. Again, creating infrastructure to interlink. And now as we sit on the precipice of what looks like a fourth industrial revolution, that might end with AGI, might end with network states, we again look at the role that commodities have to play in all of this. And 3 commodities in particular: bandwidth, storage, and compute. And for a number of reasons I described earlier, the incumbents aren't in the position to provide it, and governments are as confused as ever in how to create it. So we turn to DePIN, perfectly set up for exactly this kind of provision. And it's not just commodities at the end of the day. This idea of peer-to-peer infrastructure that lets people share, communicate, and collaborate, most importantly, in a way that they have never been able to before, is the real unlock. So, here at Escape Velocity, we are very, very proud to be among the first investors into this sector, to even call this a sector. We recognize at the end of the day, this is a very diverse group of companies, of people, and of ideas that don't look heterogeneous. And that's the point. The mechanism of peer-to-peer can be used in so many ways. You add crypto on top of that, incentivization mechanisms that are autonomous. You create it even more. I started this by saying that the world is in a really interesting place. It's at a tipping point. Big central companies focused on the creation of these commodities aren't going to be able to get it done. You need new approaches, efficient approaches, that add something different. DY is one sector that is really, really interesting exactly at this point. Decentralized compute and storage is exploding. Beyond that, there are consumer apps as well, taking that peer-to-peer experience and delivering someone something. Those might be in their infancy, but we're really starting to see them grow. Lastly, I'll leave you with this. The last 50 years has really been defined by cause and effect underwriting. You build a model, you plug some numbers in, you get an output, you decide whether to invest on the basis of that. That's how all infrastructure investing has gone for the last 50 years. And that's because corporations and corporations alone have controlled that infrastructure. It looks very different when corporations are working together with communities. Communities and corporations have so much more to do together than they have to do alone. And at the end of the day, when you think about investing into a corporation that also has a community, it needs less capital. Tokens can do things that traditional equity cannot. If you manage your liquidity well, you can create a real virtuous cycle that gives you all the growth that you need. So we at Escape Philosophy here are trying to pioneer a different kind of investing. Investing where if you do the work up front, you work hard enough, you put enough in, maybe you never have to raise capital again. Maybe you achieve escape velocity. The paradigm of bigger and bigger rounds probably isn't going to survive the test of time. It's time for something different. And that's why we were super excited to host the first DePIN conference here. And it's something that we hope we're going to do every year going forward, and we'd love to make it collaborative at the end of the day. This is a community that is in its infancy and could someday become a big part of the world. We really believe that. And looking out at you, honestly, we know it. So with that, I've done a lot of talking, and as you all know, I can talk forever. Let's kick this off. So with that, maybe we'll move on to our first panel.